Hello and welcome to Learn Coding Tutorials. In this video, we are going to learn how to use React by building an amazing ToDo app, which you can see right here. The styling is amazing and the user experience is incredible as well. So first, we can create a task. Let's say wash the dishes. We can press enter or click create. So we can say clean house create. We can click on these if we're finished with them. They turn them red and green. So green is finished, red is not finished. And that is pretty sweet. We can edit, so make React tutorial now. We can click save. We can delete. We can edit. The buttons will change. We can press cancel. And so we can delete, edit. With editing, we can do enter as well. So I can do enter. There's also validation. So if I click create without anything, it'll say please enter a task. If I try to do something that's already there, it will say task already exists. So let's say eat lunch, and then the validation will disappear. So we even have validation here. All right, so why use React? Here is Facebook's explanation for why you should use React. The two things I'll point out here is the declarative part. Basically, React will automatically check to see what's different so that your app will be more performant. So not everything's going to re-render all the time, only the parts that change. The composable components. React is really good for allowing you to create components which allow your code to be really organized and scalable, which is really important as your app gets bigger and bigger. So I would highly recommend React. It is my favorite thing to use between Backbone, Angular, and React. I like React the most out of those three. And really quickly, here is the GitHub repository if you want to use the source code. But for this tutorial, I would recommend that you type out everything yourself because that is a better learning experience. I'm going to be using version 4.2.6 because it is the long-term support version. And so download that, and once you get it installed, you can check to make sure that it's working by going to your terminal and typing node-v and then npm-v, so make sure that you have versions there. And then the text editor that I'll be using is going to be Sublime Text, so I would highly recommend that you download this because it is pretty much the best text editor out there, and I would highly, highly recommend it. So go ahead and do that, and once you get it downloaded, come back and we'll continue with this tutorial. Really quickly, here's the GitHub repository in case you want to use the source code. But for this tutorial, I would highly recommend that you type out everything yourself because it is a better learning experience. All right, so let's go to our terminal now and start making our app. First thing we're going to do is we're going to create the directory that our app is going to live in. I'm going to call it React To-Dos. You can just call it anything that you want, and you can create this manually if you don't want to use the terminal. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up this directory in my terminal. And then I'm going to open it up in Sublime as well. Here's Sublime, Command O, go to the file, and React To-Dos, and React To-Dos, open. All right, so here it is. And next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a package.json, so npm init-y. And the reason why is we're going to be keeping track of all of our dependencies. We're not just going to be using React in this tutorial. We are also going to be using Webpack and webpack-dev-server because the only real way to develop using React is with Webpack and webpack-dev-server because they were made to go together like peanut butter and jelly. And we'll kind of find out how that works as we go through this app. But we are going to build this app the right way using Webpack-dev-server as well as ES6 syntax. So we're going to be using ES6 syntax, which gives us a lot of features that normal JavaScript doesn't have. So now let's install our dependencies. First thing we're going to install is, so npm I stands for install, and then -S, that stands for --save. They're just short forms. We're going to install React and React DOM. React DOM just connects React with the DOM or with our HTML. And now we're going to install some dev dependencies. So -d stands for --save dev, just a short version of that. These are going to help us set up Webpack and ES6. I'm going to install a bunch of dev dependencies here, so don't get scared. And we'll explain them as we go. So Babel core, Babel loader, Babel preset, ES 2015, Babel preset React, React hot loader, which is going to give us our live reloading, Webpack, and Webpack dev-server. I'm going to press enter. And I'm going to skip ahead in this video while these download. And we are also going to need to install globally Webpack and webpack-dev-server. I've already done this, so I'm not going to do this on my machine. So go ahead and do that. That's going to give us the proper setup that we need. And now what we're going to do is let's set up our webpack.config.js, which is going to be our configuration for Webpack. So let's create that file there. And I'm going to copy some code from another screen, but I'm also going to explain it as I go. So first thing we're going to do is, this is just kind of boilerplate code. So once you do this once, you can copy it for your other projects. And then path is going to help us to manipulate path names a little more easily. Then we're going to have module.exports. And here is how we set up Webpack. First thing, dev tool. This is going to give us line numbers in case there are errors for debugging, which is really important for development. And then we have our entry file. And in our entry, this is going to basically define where Webpack is going to look for our files. I'm just going to copy this from another screen. The first two lines here are just stuff set up for webpack-dev-server and for hot reloading or live reloading. And .src is going to be the folder where Webpack is going to look for the initial file to run. And there's no file name here, so by default it's going to be looking for an index.js file. Then we have the output. This is where Webpack would output our files, but for Webpack Dev Server, it's not actually going to output a file. This is just for production if we were to do that. But for this tutorial, we're not going to do production. We're just going to use Webpack Dev Server, but this is just good practice. So Webpack would put it in our public folder, but again, for this tutorial, it will not. This should actually be an object, not an array here. All right, and then the file that it's going to go in is going to be file name. It's going to be bundle.js, which is standard. And then lots of weird things there. Resolve. This is going to be where Webpack is going to look for the files to bundle together. So modules directories. It's going to look in node modules and in src, which we defined above, which we have to create in a little bit. These are the extensions that Webpack is going to expect. So we have .js. And then module, this is going to be where we define our loaders. We're only going to have one loader for this file because we only need to recognize JS files. Let's move this back one. All right, and then test, we're going to be looking for, I'm just going to put JSX question mark. We're just going to use JS files, but the question mark, it just means that we can also use JSX files or something like that. We're not going to worry about JSX for here, but you can make the extension JSX if we want. But we're just going to use JS here. And loaders, this is going to be the modules that we installed to help us load our app. So React Hot is for hot reloading. And we have Babel. This is going to be our ES6 syntax. And here is the presets that we are going to be using. We're going to be using React syntax, which includes JSX syntax, which is not normal JavaScript, which is why we need that. Then we have ES 2015 here, which gives us additional features. And plugins, we are going to have two plugins here. And these are just pretty standard. Hot module replacement plugin, which has to do with hot reloading or live reloading. And then no errors plugin, which basically means that Webpack won't compile if there are errors, which means we need to fix our errors. And then now let's create our index.html file, which Webpack is going to load. So let's index.html. And this is just our basic setup. This is pretty standard for creating that. Let's just do, so let's just do HTML. And that's just one cool thing that Sublime does for me. Let's call this React ToDo's app. And then in our body, we are going to, let's just create a div ID equals app. And then we're going to load our bundle, which Webpack is going to compile for us. All right, last thing we're going to do before we get set up is we have to create this src folder. So let's create that folder now. Make dir src and then touch src/index.js, which is going to be our initial entry file. So inside of here, let's just test out that to make sure that our Webpack is working correctly. Let's just console log something. And let's actually use ES6 to make sure that ES6 is working as well. So let's say, and let's actually use ES6 to make sure that ES6 is working. So let's say let message equals hello from entry. And then we're just going to console log the message here. And let's run Webpack dev-server. And there are actually two errors here. This should be node modules, and this should be loaders. So let's run our Webpack Dev Server again. And now let's go to localhost 8080 and make sure everything's working right. And you should now see our message down here that we put in our index.js. And really quickly, let's test out our live reloading. Let's go to index.js, and we're just going to change this to exclamation points here. You can see down here that it will reload automatically. So that is the power of React live reloading, which is awesome. Now let's just continue. We're going to leave our dev server running just to kind of see the live reloading in action. Let's create a folder called components, which is where all of our React components are going to live. Let's create a new file called app.js, which is going to be where we kind of set up our initial app. And here is how we set up our first React component. We're going to import React from React first, and we are going to export default app. This is what we're going to call our component. It's going to export react.component. And inside of here, we're going to have a render method. And this is going to be JSX syntax. You'll notice we have parentheses here. So inside of React, we can actually put HTML. The alternative is to use some complex JavaScript syntax that nobody uses. So we can actually put divs and stuff in here, which is really neat, which makes our code really organized and easy to write. So let's just start by just typing something very simple. We're just going to create an h1 tag here. Let's just call it React ToDo's app. And we're going to put it into our index.js. So let's replace this with import React from React, import render from React DOM. This just allows us to render into our DOM or into our HTML. Then we're going to import app from components/app. And then we are going to render our app into document.getElement by ID. This is what we put in our HTML. We are going to save this. And this actually should be export default class app. Let's save that. So now you see this automatically show up without me doing anything. So again, that's our live reloading, which is awesome. So now let's continue creating our app. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to create our actual to-dos list. And so let's create our to-dos list first here. We're just going to mock out data for this app. We're not going to get it from a server. And so this isn't best practice, but we're just mocking out data for this tutorial. So let's just create the two tasks that you saw in my demo. So first one's going to be make React tutorial. And we'll put this data into our app after we write it here. Task eat dinner. This one was false in my demo. And then comma is completed. It's going to be true. All right, so now let's start building out some components. The first logical component that we're going to make is going to be called to-dos list. So let's create a file called todoslist.js. And inside of this to-dos list, we're going to kind of do the same thing here. So let's copy paste this. And then I'm going to erase this up here. And let's call this to-dos list. And inside of this to-dos list, we're going to create a table. Again, this is HTML, which is really neat that we can put it inside of JavaScript. And then let's create a header. So let's just say thead. And then inside of here, let's make it tr, table row, and then th, let's say task, and then th actions. Save it, go back to app.js, and now let's import that into our app here. So let's do to-dos list from /to-dos list here. And then we're just gonna plop that in here. You can kind of see how much fun React is to write. It's just like putting together puzzle pieces. So let's do that. You'll notice they show up down here. And again, this is just so much fun to write React. And next thing we're gonna do, you'll notice this table head, it would make a very good component because it's an isolated piece of code. So let's create another component and just continue with our puzzle building here. So let's call this to-dos list header.js. And let's just copy paste this here. And this goes really quickly once you kind of get the syntax down. To-dos list header here. And let's erase these two lines here. We're just going to have the header here. And then here, we're going to erase this, or let's first import it. So import to-dos list header from /to-dos list header. And then let's plop that in here now. So let's put to-dos list header. All right, and you'll notice that still works. Next thing we're going to do is we want to put this to-dos array into this to-dos list. So we want to be able to access that data from our to-dos list. And the way that we do that is we're going to put that into our component here. But since we're mocking out our data here, we want to be able to re-render whenever the props change. So I'm going to do something up here to kind of make our to-dos array the state of our app. And I'll kind of explain that a little bit more as I go through this. So we're going to have a constructor here, which is basically the first thing that this component is going to run. And I'm going to have a super props here. Super just kind of connects it to the parent that it's inheriting from. Don't really worry about that. Just realize that this is kind of the standard syntax for setting up the app. And then I'm going to set up a state. So React uses state, which you can use set state with to kind of update the state and re-render your components. And the state is going to be to-dos. Without ES6 syntax, we would do to-dos colon to-dos. But with ES6, there's a shorthand syntax, so you can just do to-dos, which is the same thing as colon to-dos. And so now we're going to pass our state.todos into our to-dos list. So we're going to say to-dos equals this.state.todos, which is exactly what's right here. And this to-dos is this array up here. So now our to-dos list has our to-dos list that we're passing in. And that comes in the form of props. So if we were to console log this.props, we would see down here that it is the to-dos array there. So if I did this.props.todos, it would be that array right there. And you can open it up and see that these are our things there, our to-dos items there. So now let's put them into our app or into our component here. So what we can do, the way that I generally do it, is I create another tr. And I have a method in here called render items. And then I'm going to create this method up here. So we want to be able to iterate through that array and display each one individually. So let's do render items here. And inside of this render items, here's what we are going to put. So let's return. We want to iterate through the props. And what I'm going to do here to iterate through it is I'm actually going to use another library called Lodash, which is one that everyone should use because it allows you to just kind of do functions a little bit more easily. They give you a lot of really clean methods. So we're going to npm i-s Lodash. Lodash just gives you a lot of really neat methods that makes writing JavaScript a lot easier. So now that is part of our package.json. And so what I'm going to do up here is I'm going to import, and I'm just going to use Lodash for a few things in this app, which is why import underscore from Lodash. And here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to return map. So map basically creates a new array out of what we have, and it's going to allow us to customize it how we want without mutating it. So we'll say this.props.todos, and then for each to-do, this is again ES6 syntax. This is the double arrow. And what we're going to do is for each to-do item, we're going to return a to-dos list item, which we have not created yet, but we will soon. And whenever we iterate through something in React, we have to give it a key. And so since our to-dos items here do not have an ID, let's just kind of give them a index number. So remember, when we use for each or map, there's also an index. That's the second argument here, or second parameter. And what we can do is let's just call the index the key index, because each key needs to have a separate index. And we're going to pass in everything in this to-do here. So we want to pass in the items in the to-do. And another way that we can do that, so there's something called ES6 spreading, and that just basically is triple dot, and then to-do. And let me just kind of explain what is going on here. And so with the ES6 function syntax, this right here is the same thing as if I did function to-do index and then return to-dos list item dot dot dot. So that's just kind of shorthand for that. And now with the spread here, that's the same thing as passing in task equals to-do dot task, and then is completed equals to-do dot is completed. You can notice how this is so much cleaner than doing this. And so I would highly recommend using ES6 for that reason. It is great for React. So now let's create our to-dos list item. Again, just putting together more pieces. So to-dos list item.js. And inside of our to-dos list item, we want to, again, return something. So again, this is going to be each individual item. This is what we're going to return for each individual item. We are going to return, and really quickly, this should actually be tbody, not tr. So in here, we are going to return tr, and we're just going to return task here. So we'll say this is going to be this.props.task, and td, and down here, we're going to do this in here, we're just going to create buttons. So let's just do, we won't use the is completed for now, so we'll just do button. This one will be edit, and this one will be delete. So now let's import that into our to-dos list here. We already have that here. And so let's import to-dos list item, import to-dos list item from, and with the live reloader, you can see really quickly if you have any syntax there. So let's save it, see if that works. Oh, I still need to run my dev server. So webpack-dev-server. And let's reload our browser. And now you can see our items here with our buttons. So that worked really perfectly. So now let's continue. All right, so next what we're going to do is we are going to create our create to do thing. Remember that was the input box with the button. Let's create a new file here called create to do.js. And inside of this file, again, let's just kind of copy paste what we have here. And let's delete this up here. And we don't need any of this stuff here. Let's just erase that stuff. And here we're just going to return and a form, and it's going to be on submit. Well, let's leave that off for now. We'll put that in a little bit. So we'll just do a form here. Let's just put an input type equals text, and let's just do placeholder equals what do I need to do. And then let's close this right here. And then let's have a button that just says create right there. Save this. And then let's go back to our app here. Let's put this above our to-dos list here. So let's just say import create to do from /create to do. And then let's put that right above our to-dos list here. So create to do. Let's save that and watch our app reload. And you'll see here, this is our input with our create. It looks beautiful right now. So next, what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how set state works with React. And so what I'm going to do, just the simplest way to do that is I'm going to go to our to-dos list item here, and let's have another constructor up here. And we're going to set the state to something up here. And this is not what I would consider best practice. Normally, I don't like to set state inside of components. I like to have a top level component that does all of this stuff. But this is mainly just for demo, and we're not using Redux architecture, which kind of has that philosophy. So we're just going to say this.state is editing is going to be false, because for each individual React item, we are not editing it right now. And so let's just say, so when we click on the edit button, it's going to be in the is editing state. We're going to do on click, and this is how we do click handlers in React. We just do on click or on mouse over or on submit. We're going to do this.on edit click, and we need a .bind this here because we want to make sure that we maintain the this context in this component, and this is the way that we do it with React. And so let's create a on edit click here method. And so we're just gonna, when we click on the on edit, we're going to say this.set state, and then we're going to set is editing to true. And then now when we are in the is editing phase, remember, or state, remember we want these buttons to change text. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to break this out into its own separate method. So again, we're just showing lots of different things that you can do with React. So we're just going to say render action section. So that, remember, that's our action section. We'll say if this.state.isEditing. So if we're in the editing state, we're going to return a certain set of buttons, or else we're going to return something else. And we're not using else here because since we have a return up here, it's automatically going to exit, and so we don't need an else there. We can just return underneath that. And so inside of this render actions section, if it's not editing, we're just going to return these buttons right here. So let's just return these buttons here. And if it's in the editing state, we want to return other stuff. So we want to return the save and cancel button. And let's get rid of this on-click here for now. And then inside of here, you'll see it's kind of reloading as we go along. Oh, we need the TD here actually, because so remember what I said about needing opening and closing tags? You can't just have two elements here. They need to be wrapped by something. So let's put a TD around these. And okay, so now let's put here, this is going to be this dot render action section. And we're going to do dot bind this here. And actually, when we are doing something like this, we actually just need to call the method. We only need to do dot bind this for click handlers and stuff like that. So let's save that. And you'll notice the buttons are still there. Let's try it. If we click edit, the buttons will change, but you'll notice nothing else happens yet. So let's hook up the cancel button now. So when we click cancel, it should revert back to not being in editing state. So let's just say for the cancel button here, we're going to create another click handler. We'll say on click equals this dot on cancel click dot bind this, and we're just going to do the opposite thing here. So we'll say on cancel click. We're just going to do this dot set state is editing false, and we need to make sure that we close this bracket here, save it. And now let's test it out. We click cancel, and we click cancel, or we click edit, we click cancel, and it works perfectly now. So we have that thing set up. Now let's set up our create button. So we have that basically working. We'll get to the edit and the delete in a little bit. I just wanted to show you the set state now. So let's go to our create to do here. And here we're going to have a on submit. And let's just call this method in here. We're just going to say this dot handle create. So basically when we click create or submit this form, this just basically allows us to press enter as well as click create. We want to grab whatever text is inside of this input box and then add it to our to-dos array here. So the way that we grab values from this to-do box is react to something called refs, which is basically an identifier for the DOM element. And so we're going to call this ref create input. And the way that we access that is let's just do a handle create down here. So if we do console log this dot refs dot create input, let's just console log that. And since this is going to be an on submit, it's actually going to refresh the page when we load it. Let me just kind of show you. So if I press enter here, it's actually going to refresh the page because that's the default behavior for on submit. So the first thing we want to do is on submit is going to pass an event here. So to prevent that default refresh, we're just going to do prevent default. And so now let's try that again, and it should now log whatever we put in here. So I'm going to put ASDF there, create. You'll notice that the this.refs.create input logged this. So it gave us the DOM element. And what we can do now is if we console log this.refs.create input.value, let's save that and then try that again. So ASDF create, you'll notice that it logged whatever's in the input box. So that's how we're going to grab what's in our input box. And so now what we want to do is, since we want to update the array in our app, we can't just do something in here. We need to do something in here. So our create task method is actually going to come in here. We're actually going to pass that into our to-dos list, or into our create to-do component there. So the way that we do that is we're going to fill that out in a little bit, but for now, let's just kind of put that into our to-dos list component here. So what we can do is we can do create task equals this dot create task. And we're going to bind it to this because we want the this to represent the this here, because we're going to do this.setState. And so we want to make sure that the context for this method stays with this component here. So inside of our create task, here is what we are going to put. We are going to take whatever task is passed into this method, and we are going to push it into our to-do state. And we're going to push the task. Again, this is ES6 shorthand, so we don't need to do task:task, just task here. And we're going to do is completed is going to initialize to false. And the way that we re-render the page is we're going to reset the state. So when we do set state, it's going to basically re-render the page, and it's going to do the automatic diff and only render what's different. And so it's not going to re-render whatever is the same. So we're going to set it to to-dos, which is going to be the new array with the task pushed into it. So now let's go here and just really quickly, if we just console log just to make sure that it's there, this .props.create task, you'll notice that if we were to create, oh, we need to actually pass it into our create to do, not there. So let's put that in here. Let's create task equals this dot create task equals this dot create task dot bind this. So let's refresh that. Click create. You'll notice that we have the function that we put in there now. So now that we have our create task here, what we can do is remember this dot refs dot create input dot value was whatever's in there. So we want to just pass this value into our create task method here. So this dot props dot create task. We're just going to pass that in there. And the reason why we're using handle create here instead of putting this method up here is we're using this inside of this method, but at the same time we want to bind this to this method in here. So we're going to create a separate method down here where we can use this here as well as pass our task in with the this context for the create task. I know that's kind of confusing, but context is just kind of complex. We want to maintain the this context for this component, but we also want to maintain the this context for this component, which is why we're kind of balancing the two. And it just kind of takes testing to make sure it all works out fine. So let's go back to our app here. If I create a to-do now, let's say ASDF create. And the problem is that we need to actually push something into that array, not call it as a function. So now let's go here, ASDF create. You'll notice that it shows up in our list now. We can create more stuff as well. But you'll notice our input doesn't actually empty every time we enter something. So let's fix that. So instead of our create to do, after we set the state, or after we do this, we're just going to empty it by doing this dot refs dot create input equals empty string, which will make it empty. So let's just do ASDF create. Oh, this should be dot value. Look how quickly we can go back and forth between debugging and doing that just with the live reloading. So enter, it empties, and great, that works fine now. So that is beautiful. Next thing let's hook up is let's do that thing where when we click it, it becomes green or red depending on whether it's finished or not. So first, let's go to our to-dos list item. And the way that we do that is that's going to affect this right here. And since we're going to have some more logic inside of this table cell now, let's create another method called render task section, where we're going to have our logic for doing this switching between green and red stuff. So here we're just going to return, and let's make it multi-line so that we have more space here. And for now, let's just put in the TD task here. And just to make sure that works properly, let's do this dot render task section. Save it, make sure it renders correctly, and it does. And now let's fill this out. So the way that we fill out this here is we can have dynamic styles with React, which is really neat. So first, let's just kind of clean this up a little bit more. Let's use our ES6 destructuring. So this is another ES6 feature where we can just take properties that are inside of an object. So we know that our props has task and is completed in it because we passed them in from our to-dos list here. So they are right here. And so now we can say equals this dot props. So now these, we can just use these as variables now instead of doing this.props.task. So we can take this out and it works still. So now for dynamic styling, what we're going to do is we're going to create a constant called task style, and it's going to be a conditional. So we're going to set the color is going to be equal to if is completed. This is ternary operator. If is completed is true, the color is going to be green, and if it's false or otherwise, it's going to be red here. And let's just make the cursor a pointer just to make sure that, just to let us know that it is clickable. And the way that we put that in there is we're just going to do td style equals task style. And so since our app initialized this to be false and this to be true, you'll notice that this one is red, this one is green. But clicking on them doesn't really do anything yet. So let's change that. Let's create an on-click handler for our to-dos list item now. So let's say, let's just make a multi-line just to make it a little bit cleaner. So, and look how much fun React is. Let's just create that down here. And let's just say on-click. So on-click, we are going to, again, want to modify this array in our app.js. So we're not going to do our method here. We want to access another method in our app.js. So let's just call that this.props.toggleTask. And we don't have that yet. Well, again, props here because we're going to pass it in from our app. And we're going to do .bind this, not really because we need the this context, but because we want to be able to pass in a task into this method here. And again, we have this task from up here, so it's already defined. So now let's go to our app here. There's going to be an error there, I think, because we don't have this method yet. So inside of here, let's create that toggle task button or method. So toggle task, and we're going to get the task here, and we're going to pass. We need to pass that into our to-dos list, which is where we are calling it. So toggle task is going to be equal to this dot toggle task, and we want to bind the this because we're going to be setting state inside of this method, and inside of this method, here is what we are going to do. We are first going to find the to-do in the array. So basically what we want to do is we want to find the to-do in the array that matches the to-do that we're editing, and then set the is completed to the opposite of what it currently is. And the way that we can do that is we can do found to-do is equal to, and we're going to use another underscore method here, or Lodash method. Find basically finds the first item in the array that matches the condition that we set. So again, we're going to search through the this.state.todos, and we're going to, in the to-dos thing, we're going to do an implicit return here. So again, we don't need brackets here because this is just shorthand, ES6. We're just going to do to-do task.task. So we're going to find the to-do task that matches the task that we are passing in, which is going to be the one that we click on. And so now that's our found to-do. And next, we're just going to swap the found to-do is completed to the opposite. And the shorthand way to do that is just to do this, the exclamation point. So is completed. So whatever it is, change it to the opposite. And then we are going to refresh the app by doing set state. And then to-dos is going to be refreshed to be this.state.todos. And the problem here is that we are passing toggle task into our to-dos list, but not into our to-dos list item yet. So we want to pass in our toggle task here, but instead of doing toggle task equals this.props.toggle task, we're going to do something a little bit fancier because we're going to be passing in a few different methods. We want to be able to pass in our, our edit and our delete functionality. So to do that all at once, so to pass in every prop, we could just pass in props here, but that would be every single, or this.props, but that would be every single prop, and we already have our to-dos props here, so we don't want to pass in our to-dos props. So one way that we can get around this is another Lodash method. So we can do const props equals omit, and this will just basically leave out props that we don't want to include in this variable. So we're going to search through this.props. We're going to omit to-dos because we don't want to include that inside of our to-dos list item. And so we're just going to use the spread operator for props here. So now in our to-dos list item, if we were to console log, let's just console log just here, this.props, you'll notice that we now have our toggle task function here. So that worked properly. So let's just erase this here. And let's just try it out now. If I click this, it becomes green, red, so now that is officially hooked up. So just kind of notice how much fun React is. It does the rendering for you. You need to do very little work to kind of figure out what's different between the different states. This set state here just does so much work for you, and it's just really neat. All right, so next what we are going to do is we are going to set up our edit functionality. So that is going to be our save button in our to-dos list item. So let's first create our save task method. And we're going to have an old task and a new task here. We're going to use the old task to match to our array up here. And then we're going to replace the old task with the new task. So what we're going to do is similar to what we did above in the toggle task. We're going to have a found to do is equal to find, and let's just copy that and put that in here. And this time we're going to match it to old task here. And then we're going to say found task dot, or found to do dot task is equal to new task. So we're just replacing it with the new task here, and then we're going to set state to refresh our page. This dot state dot to dos, and then we need to pass that into our to-dos list here. So let's say save task is going to be equal to this dot save task dot bind this. And then you'll notice in our to-dos list, we are already passing it into our to-dos list item because of this cool piece of code that we have here. So we don't need to do anything here. And now in our to-dos list item, all we need to do is we need to hook up our save button. So we're going to say onClick is equal to this dot onSave click dot bind this. And then down here, we are going to define that onSave click method. So let's write down here. It's going to be onSave click. And we want to remember we want to pass in our old task and our new task. And let's say, let's put an event here. And before we fill out this method here, when we click the edit button, we actually want this to turn into an input box. So what we're going to do is we're going to fill out our render tasks section here. And we're going to have additional logic here. We're going to say if this dot state dot editing, so if we're editing, we are going to return an input box instead of the normal task. So let's have td, and then form on submit. So again, this just makes it so that our enter button works as well. It's going to be on save click. So same as clicking the save button, it's going to do the same thing here. Dot bind this. And then we're going to have an input type equals text. And then with React, we're going to have a default value here. If we just used value, we would have an on-change handler, so we would do something every time the input changes, but we're not going to do that. We're just going to have a default starting value. We're going to have a ref to be able to grab whatever is inside of this input. And again, we need to close that, and then we're going to close the form here. So now, in our onSave click, here's what we are going to have in it. First, we want to prevent the onSubmit from firing the default behavior, so prevent default, same as before. And then we are going to say const old task is equal to this dot props dot task, because remember we need to pass that in to match to the array. And const new task is equal to this dot refs dot edit input dot value. That's the ref that we defined above. And then we're going to say this dot props dot save task, and we're going to pass in the old task and the new task. And then we are going to set state. So we want it to take away the check of the input box after we save. So we're going to just set is editing to false. And let's just test that out really quickly. So let's go to edit, eat dinner at 6, save. So that works. Make React tutorial now, enter. So our edit button is working properly now. So that is great. Next, what we're going to do is let's set up our delete button now. So again, this is going to be very similar to what we've already done. So let's just create a method here called delete task. And we're going to pass in task to delete. And we're just naming it that so that it doesn't conflict with this to-do variable here that we're going to be using. So let's just say, we're not going to do found this time. We're going to do something, another Lodash method called remove, which is going to remove an item from an array that we match it with. And so we're going to say this dot state dot to-dos, kind of the same concept. We're going to match the to-do dot task with the task to delete that we pass into this method. And then we are going to set state to refresh it. And then to-dos is going to be this dot state dot to-dos. And then we are going to pass this into our to-dos list. You'll notice this is kind of repetitive now. We're pretty good at this by now. This dot delete task dot bind this. And again, that is automatically passed into our to-dos list item from this piece of code here. And now we just need to hook up the delete button. We're going to say on click here. And since we don't need to do anything fancy with this, all we need to do is pass in the task. We can just do this dot props. We can just call the method directly here, just another way to do it. Delete task. And the way that we bind the task there is we're just going to do dot bind this, and then pass in this dot props dot task. So yeah, that's how we pass that in there. So now let's test that out. This refreshes, and then let's click delete. And it works. We can add in our tasks. So blah, blah, we can click, we can edit. Yay, it works. Everything seems to work. Last thing we're going to do is we're going to do that validation thing where right now if we create empty tasks, it's just going to do that, and that seems kind of broken. And if we do eat dinner, if we just do eat over and over, it gets kind of weird because we're matching only one, so we can't really, so that's kind of broken. We only want to be able to enter one task at a time. And so the way that we are going to do the validation is we're going to go to our create to do where our form is. And inside of our handle create, we're going to create some conditionals here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to just cache this create input up here just because we're going to be using it several times. And so let's just say const task is equal to create input. This just makes our code a little bit cleaner. Input dot value, and then we're going to say const validate input is going to be equal to this dot validate input task. So we're going to take this task and we're going to analyze it to see if there's anything wrong with it. So let's create our validate input. Basically, if it's empty or if it repeats another item in the list, we are going to want to display an error. And so first let's say if there is no task, here's the message that we are going to display. We're going to say please enter a task, and we haven't hooked up how this is going to display yet. We're just setting this up. Else if it's a repeat of another task, and here we want to find, and here we need the list of to-dos here, which we have not passed in yet. So in our app here, we want to pass in the to-dos into the create task. So in here, we want to also pass in the to-dos so that we can search through it to see if we can have a match here. And so here, now we have dot to-dos in here. So we can do dot to-dos and to-do. And basically we want to find if a to-do in the array matches with the to-do in the input box. So this task matches with this task right here. Then we are going to return another error message. We'll just say this one will be task already exists. And then else we're going to return no, which means that there is no error. And next what we are going to do is we can clean this up a little bit more. We can change this into task right here. And then we want to, and now we want to create this error message. So let's say this dot render error. And here's what we are going to put inside of there. We are going to say render error here. And this is going to be based on the state. So we need to have a state. So the error is going to be a state inside of this component. So let's say constructor props. So this is similar to what we've done on other pages. We're just having internal state here, which normally I would warn you not to do, but this is just a demo. So if you look up Redux architecture, all of this data would actually go inside of our home state here. So I would put that all in here, but this is just easy and convenient. So the state is going to start off as null, and then down here we are going to say if there is a validate input. So basically if this method returned a message, then this will be true. And then we're going to set state, and we're going to set our error to be the validate input. And if that's not true, then we're just going to continue down here. And If there's no error, we're just going to make sure that we reset the state to be null, because if there's an error, we want to cancel it if there are no errors there. So this just kind of resets it to be no error message. So now up here in our handle error, what we want to do is basically if there's no error, so if there's no error, state.error, we're just going to do an early return so that nothing happens. But if there is an error, we're just going to say return div, and we're just going to style it here. Normally you would use CSS for this, but we're not doing any CSS here. Let's just make the color red because that's a warning color. And then we're just going to display this state.error. So remember, this error is being set to be the message that we're returning from here. So the error is going to be the message. And so this is just one way to do it. There are a lot of different ways you can try this, but this is just the way that we're doing it here. So let's save it, see if there's anything wrong. So I'm going to try to create. Oh, and the problem here is that we actually need to return here, otherwise it's going to get down here no matter what. So if there's an error, we don't want it to reach the save point. So let's save that, and then let's try it again. Now if I click create, it'll say please enter a task. If I enter a task that's already there, it's going to say, and it's another bug, and here's the problem. Instead of task.todo, this should be to-do.task, obviously. So let's try that again. Let's type in eat dinner, and now we have the error, task already exists, and if we make this blank, it will say, please enter a task, and now if I enter in another one, so wash dishes, it will go away. And so our app is officially complete now. We can create, clean car, we can delete, we can edit, eat dinner at 6, we can edit, cancel, we can click this to make sure that they're finished or not. And so this app is going to change lives, and hopefully you had a good time learning how to use React. I think it's a great piece of technology. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.